So there's a troubling incident that happened in the city of Buffalo, New York, um, which is starting to become viral in of itself as part of the George Floyd protests. And it appears to show an elderly man um, either falling to the ground from being pushed or staggering as a consequence of being pushed and then falling to the ground. Um, and he's seriously injured. But what's significant about this is a few things. Um, Firstly, the man's white. He's 75 years old. I've looked at a few sources. I can't find what his name is, but the latest is that he's in quite serious condition. I understand he's in a stable condition but serious at the Erie County Medical Center Hospital in Buffalo. And the mayor of Buffalo, Byron Brown, said, "I was deeply disturbed by the video. After days of peaceful protests and several meetings between myself, police leadership, and members of the community, tonight's event is disheartening." I believe this occurred yesterday or the day before. Um, Incidentally, before I forget, the mayor of Washington, Muriel Boycer, Washington D.C., put these ordered these big letters outside a boulevard in front of the White House, near the White House, Black Lives Matter in big squares. So the politics is really, really flying with this. But about this incident, the man who's injured hasn't been named. But what you see from the video, and this has been viewed many times, um, he's a tall man. He seems to move forward towards his group of officers. They're in full riot gear. He seemed to remonstrate with them. He has a face mask on. Um, you can't pick up what's being said, but one of the officers then pushes him. Now, how strong this push was, I don't know, but what is clear is the man staggered and fell back flat, as if he'd been knocked out, and blood was coming from his head. So obviously he was in a serious condition. Now, that's one thing. I think it has a lot of echoes of what happened to Ian Tomlinson in London back in 2009. At that time, there was the G20 protests, and that was a controversial incident in which Mr. Tomlinson, who wasn't actually anything to do with the protest, kind of got caught up in the kettling, and an officer pushed him, and he died as a result. And there was an ongoing debate at the time over to what extent did he have pre-existing medical conditions. It's a familiar old debate. But what troubles me about this case, and I think this is something that absolutely will not help the reputation of the police, is there our failure to check that he was okay, at least from the video. What you see is the officer that actually pushed him does appear to go down and sort of check, then another officer seems to gesture for him to get up. Now, the latest on this story is that a police union has defended the two officers involved, Robert McCabe and Aaron Propelski. I assume one of them was the one that kind of gestured for the officer who pushed him to move on. So they're both being um, they're both suspended by Buffalo Police State Department. And the pair pleaded not guilty to the charges on second degree assault, I should say, is the charges. As a large crowd of fellow police officers and firefighters stood outside the city court to show their support for them. Let me just say from the outset, the fact that police officers, I don't know what the situation is in Buffalo, if the firefighters there share a union or what, but to me that doesn't mean anything. Um, it's just like soldiers defending other soldiers from allegations of abuse. They're naturally going to be biased. I really don't think that proves anything in terms of right or wrong. Um, and frankly, with the current environment, I think it will only tap into this perception, whether it's an accurate perception or not, that the police only care about their own. Um, there was a police union after the Eric Garner case that absolutely lambasted Bill de Blasio as mayor of New York City for his stance on that. and they even went to the extent of turning their backs in a sign of disrespect towards the mayor. So the police and their unions are not above showing partisan bias. Anyone that thinks they're completely neutral in these things is, I'm afraid, deluded. And this is what Sky News says. Earlier, all 57 members of a tactical unit at the police department resigned from the team in protest at the suspensions. Buffalo Police Benevolent Association President John Evans saying they were simply following orders. Well, I don't think that's good enough. If they were following orders, then their senior commander also needs to be suspended or investigated. Um, And speaking to local TV station WGRZ, he said the team had quit the unit in disgust because of the treatment of two of their members who were simply executing orders. Well, has it occurred to him that a lot of people watching that will be looking on in disgust at the fact the officers kept moving when an elderly man was clearly injured? This is the sort of situation where I think too many police forces, and I think it's important to put the caveat that attitudes and records vary from force to force. I don't know what the record of the Buffalo Police is. Incidentally, I've been in Buffalo many years ago, back in 1999, when my family were in the United States. We actually had an incident there in which my dad had rented a car, and a guy actually drove into the back of the car during lights. It wasn't serious. There was a bit of damage on the tail of the car, but that's where I know Buffalo, and obviously it's famous for the assassination of President William McKinley as well. But I don't know what the record is as a police department, but I really wouldn't wade too much into the fact that other officers are defending these guys, because to me, it's let's say, for example, the push wasn't that strong, and maybe the man was being a bit difficult, like he was obstructing them when he could see them coming. Right, maybe he was even breaking the curfew. Okay, but here's the bit that really should trouble any reasonable person. They kept walking past him. Other protesters, including a black protester, tried to sort of intervene, say, look, this man's hurt. And he clearly was hurt. He clearly is hurt. That's not fabrication. It's not. And this is an example where police apologists really need to just change the record. This is one example where there is no justification for them just moving on. Even if you take the position that he didn't fall from the push itself, and that's debatable. If you push an elderly man, it's clearly not going to be good. Um, Maybe it was foolish of the man to do what he done, but that doesn't mean that they should just callously walk past when he's clearly injured. There's no excuse for that. This is the emergency services. So when someone's injured, they are technically the first responders until an ambulance arrives. What they should have done, they should have had two or three officers stay with them, and fair enough, the others can keep doing what they had to do. But two or three officers stay with him, use whatever um, medical training they might have, first aid training, check if he's all right, put him in a comfortable position, called an ambulance. They failed to do that. I assume the only reason he got to hospital was because other protesters called an ambulance. So I don't know how anyone could even try to excuse that, and I've seen people already trying that. Oh well, a man was being obstructionist. That just I have a problem with people who always have this knee-jerk defense of the police, no matter what the situation. There's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for them just moving on. So the fact that other officers have resigned in disgust, they need to consider the disgust of millions of people watching that and how they come across. Because now a lot of people will be saying, oh, well, they just protect their own. They don't care about everyone else. They only care when it's their officers who are being implicated or exposed. So there's no excuse. And I don't know how anyone could even try to make an excuse. Whatever the man said or done, if he was breaking curfew, maybe he was being a bit confrontational, they could have arrested him. They could have arrested him. But the fact is, he was pushed, and he either fell back from the push itself or he staggered because he was an elderly man. and he must have hit his head or something. He obviously hit the ground hard, and it's serious. I really hope he recovers, and I hope it's less serious than it would appear to be. But if this man, God forbid, passes away or something, then it's just going to inflame the anger. It really is. This is the sort of situation where people shouldn't try so hard to defend the police because there's no excuse. And I think the mayor of Buffalo took the right response to that. And I have to say, I'm talking about police bias. I assume it was the police department themselves that suspended these officers. So really, I should say it's the union that's being biased. Um, the mayor of Buffalo said Police Commissioner Byron Lockwood ordered an investigation and suspended the two officers involved after seeing the video. No excuse.